Hello, and welcome to Being Human, our Crossroads conversation for Marjorie Prime. These Crossroads conversations allow us to bring together amazing humans and to share their expertise and insights on whatever play we happen to have at hand. And in this case, of course, Marjorie Prime is currently in production at the Blue Barn Theater and is soon to be available digitally. And on that note, we have assembled some extraordinary humans, and I'd like to introduce you to Susan Baer Collins, Dan Whelan, and Jeanette Davis, and they will enter into space and introduce themselves. Susie, why don't you go first? So sorry, Susie, your mic is...
See, I knew I started this off on a good foot. Hi, everybody. I'm Susie Collins. I've worked in the Omaha theater community for a long time, primarily as an associate artist with the Omaha Community Playhouse. This was my first opportunity to direct for the Blue Barn Theater, this production of Marjorie Prime. And so I'm delighted to be here talking to all of you.
Thank you, Susie. Jeanette, would you like to come into space?
I'm Jeanette Davis. I've been a psychotherapist in Omaha for a very long time. And I was asked to come in and do some talking and thinking about the cast, the issues of depression and suicide and Alzheimer's, just a brief, what do you think of that kind of thing? And I'll be here to answer questions and respond to them.
Thank you, Jeanette. Dan, I think it's your turn.
Thanks, Barry. I'm Dan Whalen. I'm currently a caregiver, in-home caregiver for seniors with Hillcrest Health Services in Bellevue. Goal is that this is an opportunity to help those seniors stay in their home. Without this kind of in-home care, they might have to take that next step sooner rather than later to go into assisted living or skilled nursing. So my responsibilities are fairly straightforward. In the home, I take care of a little bit of cleaning, maybe a little bit of cooking, a little chatter, a little watching television, help in the bathroom, help in the shower, those sorts of things. Whatever the individual needs from a non-medical perspective, I'm there. Recently, I have gotten certified as a nursing assistant, CNA, and hoping to take advantage of those additional skills as I help the seniors in their home.
Thank you, Dan. And thank you, Dan, for introducing me. I forgot all about that. I'm Barry. I'm the Director of Engagement here at the Blue Barn, and I'm so happy to be here. We, as you might have already gleaned, are going to be talking about some particularly weighty issues. So in terms of a content notice, there will be maybe some spoilers about the play, but also some very real talk about caregiving and depression and suicidal thoughts and actions. So the way this will kind of work is I'll be tossing out a question for the group to answer. They will each give their responses in turn. Some of these questions will be directed to the group and some will be directed individually to individual respondents. And while this is recorded, so you can't actually participate live, do want you to post any thoughts or comments in the comment boxes under the screen you're watching on. So first off, we're going to ask Susie to give us a little context about the play. What is Marjorie Prime?
Marjorie Prime is a play written by Jordan Harrison. It takes place in the future, maybe 40 years in the future. And it happens to be in the home of Tess and John, a married couple in their 50s. And her mother, Tess's mother, Marjorie, lives with them. She is suffering with dementia and needs to be with her family to help her through the day. She requires medication, She requires special needs. And so the play begins, and Marjorie is talking to a young man in a living room in his 30s. And we don't exactly know who the young man is, but we begin to glean an understanding that this is not a real human. This young man is a prime. And in the future, in maybe 2060, there's a place called Senior Serenity, which provides AI, sort of hologram-like robots that can be designed to be exactly like this person who has memory issues. It could be designed to be exactly like her husband who died 10 years prior. But Marjorie didn't want the replica of her husband to be at the age he was when he passed. She wants him to be as he was in his 30s. So this young man sitting in the living room talking to Marjorie is not a human. And we don't know that right away because he's very good at chatting and looking casual and remarking and responding to her. But every once in a while, he gives himself away. So what this play begins to explore is using these primes for people to help their memory. They will only know as much as they've been fed. So Tess and her husband, John, and Marjorie all tell stories to her husband, robot, Walter. But they've chosen, some of them, to not tell Walter everything about Marjorie's past. And is that right? And what does that choice mean? And what happens when we get to select what somebody's past entailed? That's just a little piece of what this play is about. All we did in working on it was unfold layers, but perhaps that's enough to start our conversation.
Thank you, Susie. Yes, I think that's a great foregrounding for our conversation today. And I want to move to Jeanette and ask a little bit about how you were brought into the process and what that was like working with Susie, working with the actors themselves.
They were having a sort of a misunderstanding about aspects of behavior and personality, illness, suicide. So I was just brought in to kind of help them broaden that understanding of those various issues. What does suicide mean? What's it like? How does it work? What is depression like? How does that work? What does it look like? And it was a brief, very interesting experience. That's it.
Yeah, there are 4 actors in the play, and one of them from the very beginning has major depression issues. And we got so confused in the beginning, thinking if this woman is acting severely depressed for the entire play, we're all going to slit our wrists at the end of it. And Jeanette was very illuminating about how people do behave, even though they might be depressed.
Right, so really you were, as it's your field, you provided some sort of background information, but also like your work is really instrumental in developing character itself. Like how do we faithfully portray folks with these issues?
One of the questions was, what is depression like? What does it look like? That kind of thing. And it can look like nothing. It can look like a normal person. I refer to people having a depression brain where they think in terms of what their depression is telling them. So if they're talking in a negative, life is horrible kind of way, I call it that you have the depression flu, and it's your depression brain that's talking now. It's not actually who you are undepressed. It distorts all of your thoughts and feelings. You can fake it and act like a normal person and not even know you're depressed. That's rather an interesting problem.
Thanks, Jeanette. That's fascinating. I want to move to Dan here. And Dan, there was a completely, another complete wide world of expertise that you brought that figures heavily into the play. Maybe speak to that a bit.
Thanks, Barry. It was really fascinating to watch the actors, especially the actress portraying Marjorie, sort of live in that world of someone with dementia, because it's so different. Everybody is so different, and the reaction of her daughter and son-in-law were particularly telling. I recall the daughter, being very, very angry and very impatient, and that is so typical of family, because they're clearly witnessing the loss of their loved one while they're still right there in front of them on so many levels. And that's kind of a key to working with individuals who have some diminished capacity in this manner, is can we sort of let go of our preconceived memory or notion of who this person was my whole life and just go live in their world. You know what? And that I think is represented so interestingly in the AI or holographic image of the young husband, because he's bringing back happy memories for her and I understand there's that whole other issue of, well, he doesn't bring back all of the memories. He's only bringing back certain memories, which is kind of a different issue. I kind of thought of him in a way as an old record player playing, maybe Peggy Lee or Bing Crosby songs, bringing back those memories of an older person from an earlier era, which gives them an opportunity to sort of live in a reality that's happy for them. So I think that's kind of where I came in, and felt that there was just a wonderful recreation of that on stage.
Thank you, Dan. All right, well, for the first of our round robin style questions, and you guys have each touched on it in your own way already, but what drew you to this play? What fascinates you about the play? And I know there may be many answers to this. What's the most evocative still?
Well, I'll start. First of all, we're asking actors to play non-humans, and we've all been asked to play a variety of individuals as actors, and this was a new one for a lot of us. And as the play continues, there will eventually be 3 primes, not just Walter, Marjorie's husband, who died 10 years prior, who's played by a young man, but we'll lose other characters in the play. And it's interesting to think about that Senior Serenity invented these primes, these robots, these AI holograms, to help people with memory issues. But in the play, if someone were to die, another member of the family might have purchased a prime to kind of help them with their grief. And is that the purpose of the prime that Senior Serenity planned? I'm not so sure it is. And there are a couple times in this play where primes are brought into the house to help someone who's desperately grieving for their lost loved one. I don't want to give away too many plot points, but that's major. And I just found that fascinating. And our playwright, Jordan Harrison, tells us that in the play, sometimes if somebody isn't engaged talking to the prime, that prime might just be sitting on the periphery of the set somewhere. And he said, it doesn't have to be, but I just thought that was amazing. So I'm asking my actors, especially the young man, Ben Beck, who plays Walter, many parts of the play, he's just completely in neutral. And he's seated at the side of the stage, at the foot of the stage, standing near a wall. for a whole scene. And I don't know that I've ever asked that of an actor before, but these are things that are coming to my mind about the experience of doing this play, playing people who aren't human and yet are really well done fakes. So there was a moment, there are several moments where a prime is asked something and the prime doesn't have the information. So the prime might be going along in conversation and talking, and suddenly, I'm afraid I don't have that information. And they give themselves away. Suddenly they are not real. We understand that. And I've had several friends see the play, and they like the idea that the play makes them think they're smart about watching theater, that they're slowly grasping these elements of the truth of what they're seeing in front of them that are kind of something they're discovering along the way. I love the way the play is constructed like that. It's very cool.
Jeanette?
You're wanting my thoughts about the play?
Yeah, and this can be anything. What was interesting about it to you? Not necessarily in your professional capacity, but just interesting.
It was hard for me at first to get what was going on. I knew that there was some sort of artificial intelligence, but I couldn't tell who was real and who wasn't, except it was clear that the John character was probably not. He was probably a prime. The most sympathetic character, oh, his name isn't John. Tess and John were the young couple. Okay.
Right. So it's Walter.
Yeah.
Walter, that's right. Walter seemed, it was just interesting to see this young Walter talking to this much older Marjorie that he was supposedly married to, because that's an era that she wanted to remember. And it was stunning to see that difference in both of them. Tess, I think it slowly began to dawn on me that she was in trouble emotionally. Just, occasionally she'd say something that was sharp or irritable or frantic. And so it was interesting watching how that developed with her about her mother. And John, the husband, seemed the most sympathetic, the most emotionally aware, the most in tune with his wife and what was going on. He was patient, he was kind, he was understanding. He tried to guide his wife in certain ways that were meaningful and caring. So it was interesting watching that, especially at the end of the play. It's very hard not to give that away, but to see how the end of the play ended up. And the production values of the play at the end were fascinating. The sort of modeled background that was this world that these three primes were in. That was a great, very amazing kind of scene. And they all seemed sort of sublimely, benignly fine. So those are aspects of the play that I found the most interesting.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. And I just love that both of you speak to this disorientation or is that disorientation that you have in approaching it, either as an actor or as an audience member. Who's human? What does that mean? It's really glorious. Dan, what about you? Your thoughts? Fascinating.
I really liked what Jeanette said about how John was he had so much empathy toward his wife, but he really was a bridge with his mother-in-law too. You could, right from the beginning, they had such a nice rapport. She just, Marjorie just acted so much more relaxed around John than she did her own daughter. And I think that that is fairly indicative, again, not always, but certainly fairly indicative of real family dynamics when it comes to someone living with some sort of diminished capacity, like dementia, that the daughter, the son, "Oh, I can't deal with my mother, my father, my sister, my brother right now." But the secondary family member can oftentimes be the bridge. And I really, really thought that was wonderful. And I can't help it going back to what I had thought earlier about the prime. It's sort of like, hey, this is kind of like a prime. We've got lots of things on here that give us comfort and give us solace, and we can type the word Google and gives us lots of information. And so it's almost as if, you know, that iPhone right now is sort of like that. And I had mentioned, you know, the music, the old newspaper clippings and the stories that kind of might, especially if someone is sort of in some stress or distress about maybe nothing. Let's kind of reflect and go back to a time where you were happier, you have some memory, and we can kind of get through this moment, because that's what a lot of the care is about, is just getting through those moments. Okay, I think you should eat cottage cheese because it's good for you. No, 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 no. Well, maybe mom never liked cottage cheese, so why would you offer cottage cheese as an option right now? Let's find something else that she likes and that's will be good for her. And that certainly rings true with medication, and how medication is dispersed, um, and other elements of personal care like toileting and showers and bathing and brushing teeth and brushing hair and washing hair. Sometimes it's a matter of strategizing. What can I do to sort of help mom get in that shower? We haven't had a shower in a while. What can we do? So,
Dan, I want to ask you, what do you do if the Alzheimer's client is so reluctant or unwilling to take medication or eat? Do you just, you know, make it okay and move forward? Because in 10 minutes that could all change, but what do you do?
um, that's exactly right. Sometimes you just have to wait 5 minutes or 10 minutes
Yeah.
and say, you know, we're not going to deal with this right now. It's okay. We're not going to, you don't have to take your meds right now. Come back in a couple of minutes, because there may be that moment when the person is ready to do it, ready to take the medication. I've seen this, although I'm not medical, especially working in nursing home. When the med aid would come in, I saw that so often, and I was so impressed on so many occasions with the med aid going, "Hey, let's just take a break. Let's just step back. I'm going to go over here, boom, boom, boom," and then they're ready to go. And ultimately, if they decide, "Hey, I am not taking that thing in my mouth, period," then they just have to sort of record it and move on. I did have experience with a gentleman who had not lived at home with his wife and at the time some other extended close family members, and he hadn't bathed in 18 months, and the wife was like, not going there. I'm not doing that. And that was kind of one of our goals. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? How do I do this? How do I get him in the shower? Well, the first thing I had to realize is calm down. If he's not going to get in the shower, he's not going to get in the shower. And eventually he did. But I don't know if that helped answer your question. I kind of tend to ramble, but
I appreciate what you said, Dan, about, finding a way to distract them, take them somewhere else. In the play, Marjorie is kind of fretful. She's asking about her mother's death. She's kind of jumping from subject to subject. And John has to leave the room for a moment, and he doesn't want to leave her in this state. And so he goes over to the, I don't know, the iPad or something, and puts on some Vivaldi. And Marjorie, in her former life, was a concert musician. She was a violinist. So she used to play the Four Seasons. And so that would be something that would bring her calm. And I remember there's a scene in the play too, where John says to Marjorie, well, yes, yeah, we're going to go on an adventure. And she goes, oh, we're going somewhere. And he said, no, it's shower day. And she gets all into herself. She starts saying no, she doesn't want to do that. And Dan was so helpful to talk about issues of privacy, and how when you rely on someone else, often a stranger, not a family member, maybe a family member, to help you go to the toilet or take a shower, what an invasion that is, and how anybody might respond that way. So then John deflects even the shower thing by kind of encouraging her to get cleaned up, because you never know who's going to come by to visit, sort of thing. So it's all a strategy, like you said. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Now I'm going to ask a related question. Well, it's only related because of the nature of the conversation so far, but this play touches on so many issues: family dynamics, grief, loss, elder care, everything. And we've all been in a place this last year where, many of us have experienced those same issues in a very heightened or acute way. And I wondered from each of you, like, this can be a moment, this can be, a general tactic of the play, but what struck you as really true, like really, really true to your lived experience, or, the roles you have in your own relationships, really true about the play?
This is where it's bad for me to be first. Just kidding. Jordan Harrison, I think, is really wonderful at speaking the truth, and what comes to mind, what flashes in my mind. I keep trying to think of something else, but Tess is telling an AI that looks like Marjorie Prime. She's trying to tell her what she was like, and she tells her about some of the people in her life, and she says, but even when you lost someone, you would always say, how nice that I could love somebody. And I never heard anybody say that before. In whatever happened in your life, you chose to love, however that worked out. And that stuck with me. I think that's a really, in a way, it's not a truthful statement, how nice that I could love somebody, but it sticks with me. It also sticks with me that he didn't pull any punches when it came to how this husband and wife are dealing with so many different issues. The wife's, Tess's own personal issue with feeling like she never really got the kind of love she needed from her mother because of a traumatic event that happened in the past. And how her husband was just so appreciative of her and willing to kind of go through her angst with her. He tells her at one point, long toward the end of the play, that she never bothered him during those moments. She never drove him nuts. And I could see how she could drive somebody nuts, this woman in the play. And he said, I never had a problem with it. It was the white noise of our lives together was how you respond to these things. And the white noise of our lives together was another line that just kept coming back to me when I first started reading the play, and when I first talked to Brendan Green Walsh about the set design, I mentioned it, the white noise of our lives together. I said, I just love that line. And so that partly, Jeanette, inspired the ending that you're talking about, with the modeled, almost snow on a television screen sort of look to how the ending of the play reveals itself. That didn't really answer your question, but I had fun.
Oh, it absolutely did. Don't you dare say otherwise. Jeanette?
One thing I was aware of was it would be very hard for me to be a caregiver for an Alzheimer's patient. Very. Because I would think I would never know what I'm getting. Does the person actually have moments of clarity and knows what's exactly going on? Is that real? Or is that just another permutation of this horrible disease? It's hard work. I've talked to so many clients who have struggled with their father, brother, uncle, grandfather with this problem. It sounds like you're dealing with someone, especially if you're related, that you don't know who they are anymore. Who are they? The prime aspect is helpful in elucidating who these people are. But then I got confused about, is the prime sort of injected with all information about the prime, about the character, like, let's say, Walter, or just a few things, or everything about Marjorie, or just a few things? I didn't quite know how that worked. And the frustration of John working with his wife, who was clearly slowly rolling into a really dark place, that it almost seems as if it would just hit her, and she couldn't control herself. And John is making these efforts to calm her down and talk her through it and give some suggestions, and she's basically not going there. She's pretty depressed and doesn't look salvageable after a while. Those are aspects that I just kept wondering about. This prime, how much does the prime know?
The prime only knows, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, as we understood in the play,
Yeah.
the prime only knows what it's told.
Okay.
So a lot of the prime's conversation is, tell me more about myself.
Yeah.
Tell me about you and me. Were we close? Did we have any children? You know, those are the kind of questions the prime asks, and it's only going to know as much as someone is willing to tell it. And in the case of Walter, John is telling Walter a lot. I don't know that Tess really trusts Walter enough to even talk to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is no sense of the relationship between Tess and Walter.
No.
And I could tell when Marjorie was Marjorie demented and Marjorie a prime. That was so well done.
Ruth Rath, ladies and gentlemen, playing Marjorie Prime.
Yeah, just stellar performance.
Yeah, I agree.
It's so fascinating, depending on which of the uses of the technology you focus on, there's like a horrible crime getting committed with these, like having these primes be, not the people that they're meant to embody, but the versions of those people that we can handle or would like to remember. And then
Exactly. Yeah.
and if it's a memory assistance device, then, you're also working with a flawed uh, a flawed vision of who that person is as well, right? Or your own. You would store it with what you're able to remember that day, or and as your memory shifts and you lose, hopefully you'd have access to what you can no longer remember, but certainly no sort of like cohesive sense of how much what you've been able to record actually reflects your past, or all of these questions are just.
Yeah. Right.
Dan, let's go to you.
It makes me think about the relationship again of Tess and Marjorie. So let's take out the element of dementia or Alzheimer's, and there's a mother and daughter just dealing with secrets. With that added dimension of the fact that her mother is has some dementia and not able to maybe help her, Tess, sort of deal with this secret, that tragedy from the past. That brings up to me a lot of frustration for Tess that may contribute to her spiraling downward. John does what he can do. He's obviously a very loving husband who's very, very real with Tess, but she keeps going back to looking at her mother. She keeps saying, I want more from that woman in that chair, and I'm not getting it. And that's kind of life. Even with this, the magic of the artificial intelligence sort of giving Marjorie some sense of calm in her life. That's not helping Tess at all, because she's looking at that thing going, that's not my dad. It's not really, not really my dad, and it's contributing to a lot of confusion on Tessa's part. And man, there's so much going on in this thing, isn't there?
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, and we almost don't even need the device of the science fiction and the AI. That's life. That's that's me in a room with 2 or more family members. All those things that have needs not being met, and then conversations that are just going way over one or another person's head. And oh gosh, yes. But y'all, this is tremendous. I'm enjoying this conversation. Thought I'd take a little break and let you know. But I'm going to go to each of you now individually and ask you a question. Full disclosure, these folks have let me know what they'd like to be asked, and I'm happy to oblige them. So Susie wanted to speak a little bit to her research into the play and where the idea for this came up with Jordan Harrison, and so we'll allow her to do that.
Okay. Yeah, Jordan Harrison was sort of fascinated by chatbots, AI, artificial intelligence. And at first he thought he was going to do some research because he wanted to see if he could get some really developed chatbots to get them to talk to each other and they would make the play. And then he tried that to some degree and thought that was the most ridiculous experiment he'd ever done. And he was never doing that again. And then he read, I don't know if you can see this book. It's called The Most Human Human, and it's written by a gentleman named Brian Christian. And I'm not going to remember the name of the competition, but in Edinburgh, Scotland, there is a Most Human Computer Award that is given every year. And it's a competition where Brian Christian, the author of this book, was asked to be a judge. He was sitting in a room with a keyboard and a computer screen, and he was going to spend 5 minutes in conversation with somebody at another screen and another computer keyboard, and they would have an exchange. And then he was going to do it with another room. Well, in one room was a computer who was responding to him, and in the other room was a human being who was responding to him. And it was his job to trick them up so he could spot who was the human and who was the computer. And 9 times out of 10, he could pick the human to be the human, but sometimes he was fooled. And it isn't because the computer knew all the facts. It isn't because the computer was full of endless information. It was because the computer sometimes acted so human that you couldn't possibly think it was a computer. You know, it would use vernacular and it would kind of say things that you would think only a human being would change direction so many times and lose focus and do the kind of things we do, but it was all programmed. And from that, he decided to write Marjorie Prime, a play in which there are 4 actors, 3 of whom will ultimately play primes, 1 of whom will never play anything but a human, and 1 of whom will never see him in the play, Walter, as anything but a prime. So whoever dear Walter was in his human life, we only get a little sampling. And I did want to say, I think it was earlier, Jannette was talking about, you know, there I'm looking at this young man and this elderly woman, and he's talking about when he proposed. And that's very strange. And I've had friends hear about that scene and think this is so prurient, and I don't even know if I'm interested in this play. But it isn't. There are reasons that Marjorie chooses her husband to be as he was in his 30s. And it was a time perhaps before something horrible happened in their lives so that she could feel like she didn't have to deal with it. I just thought that was brilliant writing. But anyway, I loved reading this book. I loved reading about this competition. It was inspired by, I'm not going to think of his name, the Turing test. Is his first name Albert Turing? Alan Turing, right, who was the code breaker and was very involved in early computers. He believed that there would be a day where a computer could fool people into believing he was human. It was human. So I thought that was amazing.
Now, Jannette, I know we've your area of expertise. We've kind of came at it from a couple of angles now, and I don't know which specifically you'd like most to speak to. But in the play, there seems to be very much a focus on how tragedy impacts families, and then on the other side of that, with your extensive experience of like depressive behaviors, that how do you learn to recognize depressive behaviors in yourself and others, so that these tragedies don't happen? Either one of those, I think we'd love to hear you speak to. And Jannette, you're muted. I'm so sorry.
My rule of thumb with depressive behaviors is if I'm speaking with someone whose life sounds very difficult, forever, always very difficult, and their coping they don't have good coping strategies or ability to understand much about themselves emotionally, I just assume that they're depressed, that the real origin of all of this mess of their minds is depression. And because that's where all of the confusion and sadness and despair ends up. I mean, that's where it goes. And as I mentioned earlier, that's the depression talking, when they're sounding despairing or things are impossible. It's a way to kind of separate out themselves from this depression brain that is leading them astray, so to speak. there's so many new studies on brain chemistry and the changes that can be made by simple cognitive teaching. If a person who's severely depressed can learn to reframe their thinking and repeat to themselves on a regular basis a more positive statement than the negative statement inside of them, and they're really good at being constant with it, that can produce brain change. It's not a cure, but it's a movement towards it, along with talk therapy and medication and exercise for sure. The interesting things that I've learned about suicide is that suicide leaves everyone, aghast. Why, what happened, who, where, what was going on, and they will never know the answer. And that's the most despairing experience of other people around a suicidal person after they've suicided. It's like, wait, they don't get a chance to do so much, ask so many questions. There's anger, deep hurt, despair in and of itself. Interestingly, the highest rate of suicides is among dentists, which is what? Why? That is just as it is. I mean, people have thought, well, maybe because they didn't make it to medical school or whatever. But that was the one thing I learned that I thought, oh my, that's a very strange fact. So I want to leave some time for Dan to have something to say.
Thanks, Jeanette. Dan, we've also hit your area of expertise from a number of angles. I wonder if you might share some things that people don't really know can impact the quality of life and how folks suffering from dementia and Alzheimer's experience life, such as like time of day and how recently you've had that medication or how much sleep. And I imagine you've been able to bear witness to all of these sort of variables and how they impact people's quality of life.
Right. There, one thing that is really noticeable across the board in many patients or people who suffer some form of dementia is called Sundowner Syndrome. And that literally is in late afternoon, early evening, it all just sort of blows up. And there's, if they're mobile, there's going to be movement, lots and lots of movement. Get that walker and walk around and walk around, walk around, walk around. Just relentless. Lots of, okay, I have to go. It's time for me to leave. I gotta go. It's time for me to go home. Okay, Dad, you're here. You're going to stay with us tonight. No. I have to go home. I have to go home. I have to go home. And that I have seen over and over. That's one of the most difficult things to sort of breach. It's just, you just got to kind of let it happen. The effects of the medication obviously can be both very, very positive and sometimes not so positive. Depending on the medication and the time of day that medication is taken, can sometimes act in a very positive way regarding behavior and memory, maybe bringing back that spark of something that's real. and that goes with diet. How do you tell a person of a certain age who has spent their whole life sort of rather independent, taking care of themselves, that, hey, you know, cold cereal isn't very good for you because it's just got too much sugar, too many carbs. I've had cold cereal all of my life. What are you saying? There's really got to be a balance of what is absolutely very good for that person, but we have to let them make decisions. We have to, as much as we can, like in the shower. Can you hold the washcloth? Can you clean yourself in certain areas? Private areas, take care of that on your own. That goes back to what Susie was saying regarding that difficulty that we all would have or might have when we get to a point where we need that sort of help. It's incumbent upon the caregiver to really work hard at helping that person maintain a level of independence that's as much as possible. And I think that there was definitely elements of that in the way John and Tess were helping Marjorie maintain a level of independence. John maybe more than Tess, but that dynamic was so fascinating to me, more personally than the dynamic of Walter and Marjorie, because that was out of another realm, another part of the story that was sort of different. But you had an amazing cast, and I hope people listening to this who haven't seen the play, I know they will still get so much out of it. And people listening who have seen the play, I hope will kind of share some of their experiences, because boy, that first night that you allowed me to watch rehearsal, 2 or 3 people came up right afterwards and they just said, this is my story. And that was very, very touching for me. And I was very happy to be part of that.
Oh,
Well,
I'm
thank
so
you.
grateful. Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's interesting that a play that when I first want to start to tell people about it, I have to mention artificial intelligence. But there isn't a play that is any more human than this one, about everything human, So it's a wonderful kind of juxtaposition, I guess. Yeah, I am grateful to you, Dan. Dan and I became friends because we have people that we love in common. And we were at a Christmas party pre-COVID one night, and I started talking about working on this play, and he shared with me the work that he does. And right then and there, I corralled him. I think we met at Goldberg's restaurant, and I brought my friend from the Blue Barn, Amy Reiner, and we just grilled you about treating people with Alzheimer's and dementia issues. And then Jannette is a former president of the Blue Barn board, and she was just so at the right person in the right place at the right time. And we hadn't planned on asking a psychotherapist to help us. And then it became very clear that we were in crisis, that we didn't understand a lot about what was going on psychologically in our play. And that, I don't know, maybe it was an hour and a half that we talked with you, Jannette. It was illuminating. I'm so grateful to you for that.
My pleasure, absolutely. I enjoyed that so much.
We did too. And it was shortly after that our play was put on hold. So we can say that Marjorie Prime ran from March 17th, 2020 through March 28th, 2021. Crazy.
Well, thanks, Shawl. We have time for one more question. I think we've kind of answered a couple of the other ones I've had already. And I'll just ask the question. What will you take away from this experience? What do you think remains or will stay with you of Marjorie Prime?
That's not an easy question. That was the question I was looking at in the list of questions and wondering what I would say. When I walk away from this play, I have already nostalgia for being in the rehearsal room with this group of actors and in conversations with Dan, in conversations with Jannette, the help of our wonderful stage manager, Chris Hernandez. Everybody was just on board in trying to figure out the best way to present this story that would be true and aware of all the issues that are being addressed. And we left the play in 2020 at a place that we thought we understood it. And then we came back and we started rehearsing on Zoom, and we came into the Blue Barn for about 6 days. And we realized there was so much more we still had to discover. And I'll take that forever. I'll be so grateful to those 4 actors of Lan Roblin, Benjamin Beck, Julie Huff, and Ruth Rath. We all were in the trenches together with Marjorie Prime, and I think we're all the better for it.
I'll take away this notion of artificial intelligence. Just because it's an unknown and it opens up so many possibilities, yet do we as humans want those possibilities opened up? I was at a lecture once where this woman was very excited about a robot who would be a nanny robot. And she went on and on to explain how that worked, and the nanny would come across very much as a human, and on and on and on. And I thought to myself, shoot me. No, thank you. I couldn't imagine a time when I would ever think such a notion was acceptable or even interesting, other than to just talk about. So I think artificial intelligence can be very dangerous and present life in a different and complicated way that nobody has ever even thought about. That's what I took away. Yeah.
For me, the most important interactions ultimately were the human interactions. And I'm really right with Jannette in that whole potential AI in the future sort of inhabiting our world to that extent. I think that's a little scary sci-fi for me, and that was my reaction, you know, as you allowed me to watch rehearsals in preparation for the play. On stage, John, Tess, and Marjorie interacting was the most dynamic to me, the most interesting. And clearly the story that I really took away was what is going on with Tess. There was so much going on with Tess. And that was kind of a mystery that I liked. I mean, seeing the Ben, the young actor who played Walter, was fascinating, but he was artificial intelligence, and it was interesting that we learned fairly early on, you know, he's not perfect. He doesn't know everything. And that's kind of part of the dynamic. But the human interaction, the human connection in the play was most fascinating for me.
Thank you so much, Dan. And thank you so much, Jeanette. And thank you so much, Susie. It's been wonderful to share community with you here today. For those of you watching at home or on your device or wherever you might be, and any sentient AIs happening to be reviewing this from somewhere in the future, this has been our Crossroads conversation on Marjorie Prime being human. And tomorrow, I think, this is being recorded a little earlier, but tomorrow, the digital presentation of Marjorie Prime will be up on Anywhere Seat, our streaming platform, and you can access that and purchase tickets for that through our website, www.bluebarn.org. And I, once again, have been Barry Carman, Director of Engagement here, and we're just gonna give y'all a round of wavy hands, applause.